are three minds. You have come here to listen, and I am here to speak to you. However, it is necessary that between you and me there exists a true communion of souls, a shared intention to investigate within ourselves, to search, to inquire, to listen, with the clear objective of attaining guidance on the path of the inner self-realization of the being. To truly listen is very difficult. To speak is much easier. When one listens, one must be open to the new. With a spontaneous mind, a mind free from concepts, preconceived ideas, prejudices, and so on. Yet the ego, the I, the myself, does not know how to listen. It translates and interprets everything based on its own prejudices and on what is stored in the formative center. What is the formative center? It is memory. Why is it called the formative center? Because within it, the intellectual formation of concepts is processed. Understanding this, it becomes urgent to learn how to listen with a fresh mind, rather than merely repeating what is already stored in memory. With this introduction complete, let us agree on certain concepts and ideas. First of all, it is indispensable to determine whether the intellect, by itself, can lead us to the experience of the real. There exist brilliant intellects, we cannot deny that, yet they have never experienced that which is truth. Let us reflect for a moment on the sensual mind that we use daily. I would say that it develops its concepts based on the data brought by the five senses, and from those concepts it forms its reasoning. Viewed from this perspective, it is obvious that subjective or sensual reasoning is founded upon external sensory perceptions. Because its function relies exclusively on the data of the five senses, such a mind cannot access anything beyond the limited circle of those sensory perceptions. This is evident. That mind is incapable of knowing the real, the mysteries of life and death, truth, God, and so forth. For how could it obtain such information if its only nourishment comes from sensory data? Obviously, it cannot know what comes from above. At this moment, something interesting comes to mind. During the age of Egyptian splendor, there was a congress in Babylon. People came from Assyria, Egypt, Phoenicia, and other places. The theme of this congress was striking. They wanted to determine, through mere analytic discussion, whether the human being did or did not possess a soul. Clearly, by that time the five senses were already degenerated. This alone explains how such a topic could be chosen. In earlier eras, such a congress would have been ridiculous. The Lemurians would never have conceived of such a debate. For the people of the continent Mu, it was enough simply to leave their physical bodies to verify whether they had a soul, and they could do this easily, for their physical senses were not yet degenerated. Thus, a topic like that could only have arisen in a declining and degenerated humanity. There were many arguments both for and against. Finally, a great Assyrian sage rose to the speaker's platform. This man had been educated in Egypt and had entered the mysteries. In a loud voice, he proclaimed, "Reason cannot know anything of truth, of the real, of the immortal soul. Reason may serve to defend either a spiritualist or a materialist theory. Reason may construct a spiritualist thesis with formidable logic, and by opposition may equally construct a materialist thesis with similar logic. Thus, subjective and sensual reason, nourished by the data of the five senses, can produce either spiritualist or materialist doctrines. Therefore, it is not something upon which we can rely. There exists another faculty, the instinctive perception of cosmic truth. This is a faculty of the being. But subjective reason cannot provide true information about the real. Sensual reason cannot know the mysteries of life and death." Thus he spoke, explaining to the proud, "With your reasoning you cannot know anything of truth, of the soul, or of spirit. The rational mind cannot know these things." He spoke with great eloquence and afterward departed from all scholasticism. He chose to abandon subjective rationalism and to develop within himself that aforementioned faculty, known as the instinctive perception of cosmic truths, a faculty humanity once possessed, but which became atrophied as the psychological I, the myself, unfolded. It is said that this great Assyrian sage, trained in Egypt, withdrew from all schools, dedicated himself to cultivating the land, and relied exclusively on the prodigious faculty as the being called the instinctive perception of cosmic truths. Let us go further. There exists a mind distinct from the sensual mind. I am referring to the middle mind. In the middle mind, we find religious beliefs. Obviously, the data of religion has its place in the middle mind. Finally, there exists the inner mind. The inner mind, by and in itself, works exclusively with the data brought by the superlative consciousness of the being. The inner mind can never function without the information transmitted by the inner consciousness of the being. These, then, are the free minds. In the Gospel, the sensual mind, with its theories and other elements, is known as the leaven of the Sadducees. Jesus the Christ warns us, "Take heed and beware as the leaven of the Sadducees," that is, of materialist and atheist doctrines such as Marxist dialectics. Such doctrines correspond exactly to the leaven of the Sadducees. Yet the Lord of Perfection also warns us about the leaven of the Pharisees. The leaven of the Pharisees corresponds to the middle mind. Who are the Pharisees? They are those who attend their temples, schools, religions, and sects so that others may see them. They listen to the word, but do not practice it within themselves. They are like a man who looks at himself in a mirror and then walks away, forgetting what he saw. They attend rituals for the sake of being seen, yet they never work on themselves. And that is truly serious. They are content with mere beliefs and feel no interest in inner transformation. Thus they waste their time miserably and fail. Let us move away from the discussion of the leaven of the Sadducees and Pharisees and focus instead on opening our inner mind. How can we open it? By learning to think psychologically. In this way, the inner mind opens. The inner mind works with the data brought by the superlative consciousness of the being, and through this, one can directly experience the truth of the different phenomena of nature. With the inner mind opened, we can speak about the law of karma not based on hearsay, but through direct experience. Likewise, with an open inner mind, we are prepared to discuss reincarnation, the law of eternal return, the law of soul's transmigration, and similar truths, not based on what we have read or heard from authors, but based on what we have truly and directly experienced. That is obvious. Why has money become so important in our lives? Perhaps it is because we depend on it psychologically for our own happiness. All human beings need bread, protection, and shelter. This is natural and universally known. Yet what is so simple for the births of the sky has become alarmingly significant. Money has taken an exaggerated and disproportionate value because we depend on it psychologically for our well-being. Money nourishes personal vanity, confers social prestige, and provides a means to power. It is used by the mind for purposes far beyond merely meeting physical necessities. We need money to cover bread, protection, and shelter. That is obvious. But when money becomes a psychological necessity, when we use it to achieve fame, prestige, or social position, it assumes an exaggerated and disproportionate importance. This is the root of the conflicts and struggles over possessing money. It is logical that we need money to satisfy physical necessities. But if we depend exclusively on money for our happiness and personal satisfaction, then we are among the most unfortunate beings on earth. When we understand profoundly that money's purpose is simply to provide bread, protection, and shelter, we can approach it with a spontaneous limitation. As a result, money no longer assumes the exaggerated importance it takes when it becomes a psychological necessity. We need to comprehend profoundly the true nature of sensation and satisfaction. The mind that seeks truth must be free from these obstacles. To liberate thought from the limitations of sensation and satisfaction, we must start with the sensations most familiar to us and establish a proper foundation for comprehension. Sensations have their proper place, and when fully understood across all levels of the mind, they do not take on the distorted form they usually do. Many people believe that if everything were organized according to their political party, the world would be happy, abundant, peaceful, and perfect. This is false. In reality, nothing can exist externally if we have not individually comprehended the true meaning of things. Human beings are internally poor, which is why they seek money and material possessions for personal satisfaction. When a person is poor internally, they seek money and objects to complete themselves and find fulfillment. This is why money and material goods assume disproportionate value, and why human beings are willing to steal, exploit, and lie to acquire them. This explains the conflicts between capital and labor, bosses and workers, exploiters and exploited. All political changes are futile if we have not comprehended our internal poverty. Political systems may change repeatedly. Social systems may be reformed again and again, but if we have not deeply understood our inner poverty, individuals will always find new ways to satisfy personal desires at the expense of others' peace. Immanuel Kant, in Critique of Practical Reason and Critique of Pure Reason, demonstrates that subjective and rational reason cannot produce knowledge beyond the world of the five senses. Intellect alone is rational and subjective. It always demands demonstration. When learning about reincarnation or karma, truths perceived only by the inner mind cannot be proven to those dependent on sensual reasoning. Demanding facts in the sensory world is like asking a bacteriologist to study microbes with a telescope or an astronomer to study stars with a microscope. It is impossible. Subjects like reincarnation, karma, and post-mortem life are accessible only to the inner mind, never to the sensual mind. Demonstrations can only be made to the inner mind, but first, the candidate must have opened it, otherwise it is impossible. We need money to cover our immediate physical necessities. Unfortunately, this necessity often transforms into greed. The psychological I, perceiving its own emptiness and misery, assigns to money and possessions an exaggerated and absurd value far beyond their true purpose. Thus, the I seeks external wealth because it is poor internally. The I wants to dazzle others with possessions and money. In this state, our relationship with money is based on greed. We often justify this greed with necessity, but greed is the hidden cause of hatred and the brutalities of the world. These often manifest even as legal actions. Greed is the source of war and suffering. If we want to eliminate greed in the world, we must first comprehend that this world exists within ourselves. We are the world, and the greed of others exists within us. All humans live within their own consciousness. The greed of the world exists in the individual, and only by eliminating the greed within ourselves can we eliminate the greed of the world. Only by understanding the complex process of greed across all levels of the mind can we truly experience reality. Now, having seen this clearly, it is appropriate to deepen our understanding of the faculties. The intellect by itself is one of the coarsest faculties in the levels of the being. If we try to rely solely on intellect, we will never grasp cosmic truths. Undoubtedly, beyond the intellect exists another faculty of cognition, the imagination. This faculty has been greatly underrated, and some even call it the fool of the house, an unjust title. If imagination did not exist, inventions such as tape recorders, cars, and trains would not exist either. A wise person who wishes to create an invention must first imagine it and then project that image onto paper. Similarly, an architect who wants to build a house must first visualize it before projecting it on a plan. Therefore, imagination is the faculty that allows creation. It is far from despicable. Are there different types of imagination? Undoubtedly. We could call the first type mechanical imagination, which is mere fantasy formed from scraps of memory and is often prejudicial. The second type is intentional imagination or conscious imagination. Nature itself possesses imagination. Were it not for imagination, creatures would lack perception. Because this faculty exists, perception occurs, and images form in the perceptive center of the being. Nature's creative imagination has given rise to the countless forms that exist. In the times of the Hyperboreans and Lemurians, intellect was not used. Instead, imagination guided humanity. People were innocent, and the marvelous spectacle of the cosmos reflected upon their imagination like a crystalline lake. That was a different kind of humanity. Today, it is painful to see that people have lost even imagination. This faculty has degenerated frightfully. Imagination can be developed, and doing so brings us far beyond the sensual mind. Development of imagination leads to psychological thought, and only psychological thought can open the doors of the inner mind. By developing imagination, one can learn to think psychologically. Imagination, inspiration, and intuition are the three essential paths of initiation. However, if we remain trapped within the sensorial functions of the intellect, we cannot ascend these steps. I do not mean to say that the intellect is useless, far from it. Every faculty is useful within its proper orbit. A planet is useful in its orbit, but catastrophic is out of it. The same applies to human faculties. It is absurd to take reason or sensual reason out of its orbit, as this leads to materialist skepticism. Why do so many students of pseudo-esotericism and pseudo-occultism remain trapped in doubt? Why do they move from school to school, only to reach old age without attaining anything? Through experience, I have observed that those who remain trapped in the intellect fail. Those who try to verify the truth with intellect alone fail, because it is like trying to study astronomy with a microscope or bacteriology with a telescope. If we want each faculty to function within its proper orbit, we must reject the doctrines known as the leaven of the Sadducees and Pharisees, and learn to think psychologically. This is impossible if we remain trapped in the intellect. Therefore, it is worth beginning the ascent through the marvelous stairway of imagination, then to inspiration, and finally to intuition. Money is necessary, that is true, but it is essential to understand our correct relation to it. Neither asceticism nor stinginess alone can achieve this understanding. The correct relationship with money does not come from renouncing or coveting it. It comes from comprehension. Comprehension allows us to intelligently recognize our material needs without becoming psychologically dependent on money. Once we understand our correct relation to money, the pain caused by generosity and the suffering caused by competition ends. We must differentiate between physical necessities and psychological dependence. Psychological dependence creates exploitation and slavery. It is urgent to understand the inner nature of the I if we wish to become internally rich. One who is internally rich cannot exploit others, cannot lie. One who is internally rich is free from the obstacles caused by sensation and personal satisfaction. One who is internally rich has found true happiness. Consciousness directly perceives the reality of each natural phenomenon, and the inner mind allows it to manifest. This is why the opening of the inner mind gives birth to authentic faith in humanity. From another perspective, materialist skepticism is a hallmark of ignorance. It is undeniable that the most illustrious ignorant ones are entirely skeptical. Unfortunately, belief is often confused with faith. Paradoxically, we must emphasize, he who has true faith does not need to believe. Authentic faith is living wisdom, exact cognition, and direct experience. For many centuries, faith has been confused with belief, and it requires great effort to help people understand that true faith is wisdom, not vain belief. Inferential peace, Samael Aun Weor.